Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Daily Devotions with Pastor Peter. We are in Genesis 11 today, and it's a very interesting chapter. Let's read together. At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words. All the people migrated to the east. They found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began saying to each other, "Let's make bricks, harden them, and with fire." In this region, bricks were used instead of stone, and tar was used for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world." But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower the people were building. "Look," he said, "the people are united, and they will speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do will be impossible. Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other." In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. This is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, He scattered them all over the world. Scattered them all over the world. This is the account of Shem's family. 2 years after the Great Flood, when Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arphaxad. After the birth of Arphaxad, Shem lived another 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arphaxad was 35 years old, he became the father of Shelah. After the birth of Shelah, Arphaxad lived another 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah was 30 years old, he became the father of Eber. After the birth of Eber, Shelah lived another 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber was 34 years old, he became the father of Peleg. After the birth of Peleg, Eber lived another 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg was 30 years old, he became the father of Reu. After the birth of Reu, Peleg lived another 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu was 32 years old, he became the father of Serug. After the birth of Serug, Reu lived another 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug was 30 years old, he became the father of Nahor. After the birth of Nahor, Serug lived another 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor was 29 years old, he became the father of Terah. After the birth of Terah, Nahor lived another 119 years and had other sons and daughters. After Terah was 70 years old, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This is the account of Terah's family. Terah was the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran was the father of Lot. But Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, the land of his birth, while his father Terah was still living. Meanwhile, Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. Milcah and her sister were daughters of Nahor's brothers Haran. But Sarai was unable to become pregnant and had no children. One day Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and his grandson Lot, his son Haran's child. They moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. He was headed for the land of Canaan, but they stopped at Haran and settled there. Terah lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran. Some great things in this chapter. This chapter is interesting in a few ways. One, it shows us how God would speak in plural form. Let us, even though God is one, we see that established in Abraham's in Moses' writing of Exodus. Or Deuteronomy, and all these places where he says the God, honor God, our Father, our God is one. We see this all over the place, but that God spoke in three persons. And so this is where we get an image of the imagery as well, too. Geographically speaking, this place in Babylonia is a real place. And back during the war, the Second Iraq War, people were destroying these ziggurats. The ziggurats were temples and were buildings that were built like layers of a cake, in a triangle shape that would build higher and higher and higher. This time period was when the pyramids were being built in Egypt, as well as the ziggurats being built in Babylonia, Iraq, Iran area. And now the history of these places, as far as I understand, some of it has been destroyed, but it was around and it stood for the longest time. So again, the Bible shows us that these places were real. And it gives more validity to Scripture. And like I said, in Genesis, we need to believe in Genesis because Genesis is an account of historic facts that we see here, as well as it's pointing us closer and closer. It's like a funnel where it comes in from here's the beginning of the world, and we're focusing now, as we see here, it goes into the life of Abram. It ends in this part in this chapter. Now, we see here in this chapter, people were building ziggurats or temples or buildings, and God came down and confused their language because, again, it was about their pride, not about what God is doing. They had no regard for God at this moment. This was after Noah. Believe this. So figure this out. You have Adam and Eve, things messed up. You had Noah. Things messed up to the point where they had no regard for God. It was about themselves, about them being famous, not about making God famous. That was the problem. It was about themselves. And when we think about it, everything boils down. When we sin, it's not about someone else for the most part. We sin because it's about me. It's my pride, what I want to feel, what I want to, sense of me being better than everyone else. I want to be famous. And so this region that has been, even in our history today too, we see that they want to be made famous. But the Lord looked down, he saw, let's mess this up, let's confuse them. Let's not allow them to continue to do things, because nothing will be impossible for them. They would be like gods. So after things got confused, the city was called Babel. God confused their language. They scattered them all over the world. And as we see then, everybody spread out all over the world. We could trace ourselves back to here. And the reason why I say we could trace ourselves is because the Bible doesn't trace us per se back to these people. However, it goes down and traces the line down to Abram. And that's why we have genealogies as well too. It doesn't tell us everybody who was born in each family line, but specifically this person to that person to this person to that person. And we got all the way down to Abram. And we know Abram later on, his name was changed to Abraham, which is, he is the father Abraham with many sons. Many sons had father Abraham. And we sing that song all the time when we were kids. But we see here, Terah was Abram's father. Okay? And they were already headed to, Canaan. They were from Ur of the Chaldeans. Ur is a very populated place. If you go back in history, I believe Hammurabi's code was already established during the Babylonian time. If I got my history correct me if I'm wrong. And they were already going through and establishing civilization. In order for God to work in the lives of the people he chooses, he has to pull them out of the busy center. Which is difficult sometimes because I live in a city. I live in Orange County, and it's a very big, sprawling area. I mean, from L.A. County to Orange County, Ventura County to Riverside County or Inland Empire, it just kind of blends in with each other. I mean, there's cities here, but it just blends in. There's no real borders. You could see a sign that says, "Welcome to the city of whatever," and you're there. But when you're living in a city like this, there's a lot of influence, a lot of opportunities, but a lot of sin opportunities as well, too. And God knew this. And when he wanted to establish a nation through Israel, he had to establish and take them away, and they had to be all in. They had to be all in. But interestingly here, verse 31, one day Terah took his son Abram, his daughter-in-law Sarai, his grandson Lot, and moved away from Ur of the Chaldeans. He was headed for the land of Canaan, but they stopped. And settled. In our lives sometime, when God calls us somewhere, and this is something that I need to be reflective to, when God calls us somewhere, do we go at the very beginning, but somewhere along the way we stop? We don't do anything bad, we may not do anything good, but we're there. Neutral. Frozen. And in our lives, as we hear God's calling, and this is the important thing, some of us, we may never hear what God is calling us to do. We may never care, and some of us may never listen. But for those of us who have listened to God's calling, where was it that we stopped along the way and settled? Or did we go full-blown? Did we continue to go all the way to the very end? In the next chapter, we're going to go into this a little bit more, but then, I kind of wonder what would have happened if it wasn't Abraham that we can call Father Abraham. But what would it look like if Terah was the one that we considered the father of Israel? If he obeyed and didn't settle? Maybe he was too old. Maybe that wasn't God's plan. But maybe what if it was? And that's the thing, too. We kind of think about calling on life. If God chose me to do something and I failed, or I didn't do what he called me to do, he will still continue the work. It just might not be through us. And what a sad situation that would be for you, for me, if we just didn't step up and keep going. He headed for the land of Canaan. But because he stopped, everyone had to settle. Terah, verse 32, lived for 205 years and died while still in Haran. We don't know the story, but we know that Abram already had sights on Canaan because Haran led him there. Sarai didn't question it because Terah led them there, on their way there. But some reason or another, he stopped. What's stopping you from doing what God's called you to do? And the contrast between the Tower of Babel and the story that we see here with Terah was that this Tower of Babel was about the pride of the people. Heading to Canaan was about leaving everything, taking what you have in your hands, and leaving to go where God has called you. We have two choices: pride or Christ. So, my friends, something to think about today. What are your priorities? Where do your values lie? And where do you focus everything in your life? We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.